Hi readers! We're going to continue reading Whittington today, but first I have a couple updates for you. The first thing I wanted to share is that in my own reading time I've just finished Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, so that's been really fun for me to reread that series. I know I have some fans of the books on here. The second thing is that I have my old faithful Lord of the Rings Pez set here for company today. So in addition to having you as a virtual audience, I have them as a somewhat real audience. So that's nice. Okay, we'll pick up in chapter 15 of Whittington. Chapter 15. The boy goes to work for Fitzwarren. Since his business had to do with consignments and cargoes in many ships, Fitzwarren spent part of every day hurrying around the docks, delivering and collecting his packages and keeping an eye out for sailors who had plants and strange things to sell. You had to be quick to survive there, and tough. The docks were no place for the timid. The merchant was getting on. 50-odd was a high age then. The boy appeared quick and tough, even though he was half-starved. He could read and figure enough to manage the way-bills. He was anything but timid. Fitzwarren decided to try Dick on the docks. He could handle the smaller parcels and keep a watch for curiosities. He knew something about plants. The boy started going down to the water with Fitzwarren to collect consignments. He studied how the merchant jollied the captains as he paid them, so his dealings always seemed more pleasure than business. He paid attention to how his master arranged for cartage of the bigger loads to his counting house, and how he dickered with the sailors for bulbs, roots, nuts, odd carvings, beads, weavings, shrunken heads, mermaid hands. They bought all those things. The boy's pay was such clothing as the cook turned up, room in the merchant's drafty attic, his board. Breakfast was milk warm from the cow, porridge, and dark bread with butter. Dinner, what we call lunch, was hard-boiled eggs or a cold roast chicken he shared with Fitzwarren and washed down with bitter ale. For supper, roast meat of some kind, greens from Fitzwarren's garden, a piece of fruit, bread, and cider. Sometimes there was a suet pudding if the cook was in a good humor. The pudding was rich, but it wasn't sweet. Sugar was something rare. It wasn't long before Dick was on the docks alone with money to pay for the orders and something extra in case he saw a curiosity. He made the docks his own, recognizing the regulars, learning their names and trades. He got to know the wherrymen and porters, the loiterers, the ones to keep away from. Now I want you to think for a minute about what this shows about Fitzwarren and Dick's relationship, that he would let Dick go alone to the docks with his money and with the responsibility of even finding things that he hadn't necessarily asked for. Perhaps what trait it shows in Dick and what it shows that Fitzwarren knows about Dick. So maybe think about that for a minute. I'll move on. He would jump into the small boats that ran from the docks to meet the ships before they docked. He'd haul himself up the ropes like a sailor to vault onto the deck. He learned the merchant's eye for rarities and his smiling skill at bargaining. Sometimes Dick had to pay with a promise. Word soon got around that if you sold him on credit, he was sure to be back early with what he owed. That word always gets around. Within a year, he was more the size of boys his age. The cook took pride in that. Her meals had got better with someone hungry to cook for. Her temper had sweetened too. She smiled sometimes. She was beautiful when she smiled. Dick managed now and then to bring her a bead that had come by land and sea from India, a bright bit of Africa cloth he'd got from one of the sailors. London was a town of ocean fogs coming in with the smells of the river, sea moss, fish, old rope, decaying hulls, salt, smoke, bits of cooking. Bells sounded the hours, calls to worship, alarms, laments for the dead. Dick got up to the first tinkling ones. Then the large ones started. There was no pattern to the bells ringing, the deep ones galloping along, the smaller, high-pitched ones going as fast as they could, like small dogs racing around big ones. Most of the London bells had more silver in them than the bell in his grandmother's church at home. That one had made a harsh, dry clink. The few times he heard one in London that sounded like it, He'd see his grandmother's face, and his knees would go weak with homesickness. He was 9 years old. This is where the cat comes in. I was wondering about the cat, said the lady. But now it's time for the reading lesson. I want you to maybe predict in your mind what the reading lesson will be like for Ben, if he'll enjoy it perhaps more now that he has the lady in Whittington to help him out, or if it will be like it's been for him, frustrating and difficult. So maybe make that prediction before we read on. Chapter 16, Ben's first reading lesson in the barn. Whittington said Ben should sit close beside Abby because this was the way that Dick had done it with his grandmother. Abby was to read very slowly, pointing with her finger at each letter as she sounded it out, and then repeat the word as the old lady had done. Then Ben would read it aloud, sounding out the same way Dick had. They started with a psalm. Now, some of you might not know what a psalm is, but we've talked about this in class in the past. A psalm is kind of like a poem, and usually a poem of praise. There's an entire book of psalms found in the Bible, and that's what they're reading right now. Whittington said Ben should learn that word first, so Abby had him sound it out letter by letter. He could make all the sounds okay. The P was a problem. Abby explained that sometimes letters in words are silent, like the P in psalm and the S in island. Everyone looked blank. What does psalm look like? Whittington asked. He'd seen words before, but they'd never interested him. Now, watching Ben struggle with this word, he wanted to see it. Abby tried to show him in the book, but the cat got lost in the sea of marks on the page. She fished a pencil from her backpack and drew the word in big capital letters across the nearest stanchion. Psalm. They all stared up at it. Children, chickens, duck, cat, horses. The rats had gathered too, rocking on their haunches, whispering to each other, nose to nose, in their way. The animals gathered around like the devout, witnessing a miracle. It was a miracle. Out of 5 black marks that had their origins 1,000 generations back in a place lost to memory, Ben conjured up sounds that made a word that in turn evoked the presence of something that wasn't there. He got the picture of psalm and how it should sound, and he locked it away forever. But he always had to be careful to skip that tricky P that started it. So now you have 1 word already, said the cat, who had no idea how many words there were, but realized it was going to take more than a morning to get this boy reading half as well as his sister. The Lord is my shepherd, Abby read, sounding out each letter and pointing as she went. The Lord is my Ben repeated. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He maketh me to lie No, said the girl. D, not B. This went on for a while. When they finally got to the 4th verse and Ben read Beth for death, it was as Whittington remembered and just as painful. You're reversing, he said. That's what my boy did. The boy in my home before. They said he read B's as D's, D's for B's, P's for Q's, A's for E's. They called it dyslexia, which didn't tell him anything. Before he was sent away, his parents were giving him lists of words to memorize, so he'd know that since there's no such thing as Beth, the word has to be death. The cat didn't tell how furious his boy's parents got when he missed, how their anger added to the child's confusion. Maybe you could do what he did, memorize a list of words every week. The cat figured Abby wouldn't pressure Ben the way his first boy's parents had. Ben looked dubious. The lady was dismayed. She'd learned to swim in less time than it took this boy to do a Bible verse. She wondered if it was worth the effort. Animals had gotten along without reading for a long time. That night, when he came over to tuck in the animals, Bernie's flashlight picked up Psalm written across the stanchion. He wondered for a moment, but his knee hurt and the water jug was leaking. I am going to read on a bit farther, but before I do, I want to just remind you guys that reading is not a natural thing for humans to be doing. reading is very difficult because our brains are not actually wired to read. They're wired for story, like what we're doing right now, me telling a story and you listening. In fact, that's how humans eventually developed language that was written, because they wanted to preserve their stories. And that's how we have things like Aesop's Fables, the Bible, the Quran, or really other important texts, was because they were all told as stories, ear and mouth, like that, instead of eyes looking at words and interpreting that way. So if you're somebody who struggles with reading, you should know that that's okay, because reading is a very difficult task, and it's not something that we were initially maybe kind of programmed to do. It's something that's kind of outside of our normal habits as humans. Okay, chapter 17. Blackie arrives. It got down to 10 degrees below zero that night. The next morning, a man in town who kept chickens went out and found his black hen frozen. Somehow she'd got out of the hen house and became stuck in the snow. He revived her in cold water, everything except her feet. They were wrecked. She'd be too much trouble for him now, but how do you throw out a lame hen? Bernie was the only person he knew who would keep her. On his way to the Texaco, he stopped and bought 2 cigars. Bernie was out on a road test when the man with the hen got to the station. He left her in a milk crate with a note and the cigars and drove off with an easy conscience. Bernie swore when he saw the hen and the cigars. Even without reading the note, he knew why she was there. She didn't seem to be suffering, though. She was cheerful, clucking, and excited about everything. She just couldn't work her feet. She hobbled and flutter-jumped to get around. She didn't fall over. Bernie pocketed the cigars and drove her out to the barn. A while back, the grandkids had kept rabbits. He'd built a hutch for them on an old table. The rats had done in the rabbits. The hutch was in the back of the barn, somewhere among the abandoned cars, old gas pumps, skis, and everything else that gets tucked away in a barn. Bernie dragged it out and brushed it off, made a bed of hay in it, and cut down a milk carton for a water dish. He put the hen in the hutch with a cleaned-out tuna can of the sweet molasses grain. She flapped and staggered around in her new quarters, found the grain and water, and settled in. The animals watched all of this with interest. No sooner had Bernie headed back up the hill than Coraggio clambered up on the hutch, and the 2 chickens started burbling away at each other, the cockerel telling his story, Blackie the hen telling hers. They became such friends, Bernie had to cut a hole in the top of the hutch so Coraggio could sleep next to her. They chirred softly together for hours every day, heads close like people whispering secrets. Outside, everything was covered in white, except the mound of horse manure and spent hay Bernie added to every afternoon. The heat from the rot going in that pile kept it warm for earthworms, grubs, maggots, insect eggs, and small animals like mice, voles, and moles. The mound steamed across winter like a dark freighter. And that's where we'll stop for today. So please tune in. I'll hope to get the next video up tomorrow of chapters 18, probably 18, 19, and 20. So tune in for that. I hope you're reading lots, friends, and I hope that you're staying positive. And on this beautiful day, I hope you're getting outside some. Stay cool.